Most people think the coldest thing about Christmas is the snow. They're wrong. The coldest thing is the sound of your own father's voice telling you that you're no longer welcome under his roof. I was 19, standing on a curb with nothing but a damp hoodie and the realization that my family's love had an expiration date. I thought the frost would take me that night, until a man named Julian stepped out of the shadows and offered me a choice that would rewrite the next 3 years of my life. But Julian wasn't just a stranger. He was a man with a secret of his own, one that explained exactly why he was looking for a boy like me on the loneliest night of the year. The snow didn't fall in soft, cinematic flakes. It came down like shards of glass, stinging my cheeks and blurring the Christmas lights of the suburban houses I passed. My name is Leo, and at 19, I had just learned that unconditional love sometimes comes with a very specific set of conditions. My father's voice still echoed in my ears, louder than the wind. Not under this roof, Leo. If you're choosing that life, you're choosing it alone. The life he meant was simply me, honest and tired of lying. I hadn't even had time to grab my heavy coat. I had a backpack with a laptop I couldn't use, a charger, and a single photo of my mother before she'd passed away. My sneakers were soaked through by the time I reached the main road. The gas station signs flickered with a sickly green neon, casting long, lonely shadows on the slush. I sat on a concrete bench near a closed-down diner. It was Christmas Eve. The world was tucked away in warmth, passing around platters of ham and opening silver-wrapped boxes, while I watched my own breath hitch in the air like a dying ghost. I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost that hadn't realized it died yet. Every car that drove by was a reminder of what I didn't have. Families laughing behind fogged-up glass, trunks stuffed with gifts. I tried to remember the smell of my mom's pine-scented candles, but all I could smell was exhaust and frozen asphalt. My fingers were turning a frightening shade of blue-white. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a destination. I just had the crushing weight of knowing that the people who were supposed to love me most had decided I wasn't worth the effort. Hours passed. The traffic thinned. The silence of a winter night is a heavy thing. It presses against your ears until you feel like you're underwater. I leaned my head against the cold metal of the bench and closed my eyes. I was so tired. I thought, maybe if I just sleep for a little while, the morning will be kinder. That's when I heard the crunch of boots on ice. A shadow fell over me, blocking the glare of the street lamp. I didn't look up. I expected a police officer to tell me to move along, or a drunk reveler to make a joke. "You're going to freeze if you stay here," a voice said. It wasn't harsh. It was deep, steady, and held a note of genuine alarm. I forced my eyes open. Standing there was a man who looked like he belonged in a different world. Tall, wearing a heavy wool overcoat and a scarf the color of midnight. He looked at my shivering frame, then at my light hoodie, and his expression shifted from concern to something sharper, something like recognition. "I'm fine," I managed to whisper, though my teeth chattered so hard the words barely made it out. "You're a terrible liar, kid," he said. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask for my story. He just reached out a hand. "My name is Julian. I live 3 blocks away. I was just heading home from a late shift at the library. Come on, get up." "I can't. I don't have anywhere to go," I confessed, the first sob finally breaking through my chest. Julian didn't flinch. He stepped closer, and for the first time in hours, I felt a radiated heat. "I know. That's why you're coming with me. It's Christmas, Leo. Nobody stays on the road tonight." He didn't wait for a formal yes. He simply looped his arm under mine, steadying me as my frozen legs buckled. As we walked away from that lonely bench, I didn't look back at my parents' neighborhood. I just looked at the steady, sure footsteps of the stranger who had decided for no reason at all that I was worth saving. Julian's apartment didn't look like a bachelor pad. It looked like a sanctuary. As he pushed open the heavy oak door, the scent of cinnamon and old paper hit me like a physical embrace. It was a small space, lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves that seemed to hold the walls up. A single lamp cast an amber glow over a velvet armchair, and in the corner, a modest Christmas tree stood, decorated not with flashy ornaments, but with dried orange slices and twine. "Sit," Julian commanded, though his voice had softened. "By the radiator. Don't move until your shivering stops." I sank onto a rug that felt like a cloud compared to the frozen pavement. My body was reacting to the heat with a violent ache, the kind of pain that comes when life starts returning to limbs that had given up. Julian disappeared into a galley kitchen, the clink of a kettle and the ceramic thud of a mug providing a soundtrack to my disorientation. Who was this man? He looks to be in his late 30s, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to have read every tragedy in the books he owned, yet remained kind. He returned with a thick, oversized wool sweater and a steaming mug of cocoa. "Change into this. Your hoodie is damp from the sleet," he said, setting the mug down. He turned his back to give me privacy, a small gesture of respect that made me want to cry more than the cold ever did. I pulled the sweater over my head. It smelled like cedar and expensive soap. It was huge on me, the sleeves swallowing my hands, but it was the first time I felt safe in years. I wrapped my fingers around the warm mug, staring at the steam. "Why?" I finally asked. My voice was raspy, a ghost of its former self. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." Julian sat in the armchair across from me, crossing one long leg over the other. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with a quiet, steady understanding. "I was 19 once, Leo, and I had a father who thought his pride was worth more than his son. I recognized the look of a boy who has just realized the world isn't what he was promised." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was a space for me to breathe. I told him then, not everything, but enough. I told him about the dinner table that went silent when I spoke my truth. I told him about the suitcase left on the porch and the lock clicking shut behind me. I told him how I thought the stars looked indifferent to whether I lived or died tonight. "The stars are indifferent," Julian said softly, leaning forward, "but people shouldn't be. You aren't a mistake, Leo. You're just a traveler who hit a landslide, but the road doesn't end here." He stood up and walked to a hallway closet, pulling out a set of fresh linens. "The guest room is small, mostly full of overflow books, but the bed is warm. You stay here as long as you need. No rent, no explanations. Just be." I looked at the small Christmas tree. For the first time that night, the lights didn't look like blurred warnings. They looked like stars brought down to earth. I realized then that my family hadn't just thrown me out. They had accidentally thrown me into the path of someone who actually saw me. "Julian?" I called out as he turned to head to his own room. "Yeah?" "Merry Christmas." He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Merry Christmas, Leo. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring out the rest of your life." That night, for the first time in 19 years, I didn't dream of falling. I dreamt of a library where every book had my name on the spine, and the heater hummed a low, constant song of "You are here, you are here, you are here." Time doesn't just heal, it builds. It had been exactly 3 years since that frozen night on the concrete bench. 3 years since a stranger in a wool coat decided that my life was a story worth continuing. As I stood in the kitchen of the apartment that was no longer just Julian's but ours, I realized how much the geography of my world had shifted. The scent of cinnamon was still there, but now it was joined by the smell of roasting garlic and the pine needles of a tree that reached the ceiling. I wasn't the trembling boy in the damp hoodie anymore. I was a man who looked in the mirror and recognized the person staring back. Julian walked in, shaking the snow off his umbrella. He looked exactly the same, though perhaps the lines around his eyes were softer now, etched by laughter instead of the solitary silence he'd lived in before I crashed into his life. He dropped a bag of groceries on the counter and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, setting it next to the fruit bowl like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Found this at the jeweler's on 5th, he said, his voice that same steady anchor. It reminded me of the light in the lantern room we talked about last week. I opened it. Inside was a silver compass charm. On the back, engraved in tiny, perfect letters, were the coordinates of the bench where he found me. "So you never forget that the road led you here," he whispered. "I could never forget, Julian," I said, my voice thick. "But I don't look back at that bench and see an ending anymore. I see the place where I finally stopped running." We spent the evening in a way my younger self would have found impossible to imagine. There was no walking on eggshells, no fear of saying the wrong thing, no conditional love. There was just the steady hum of two lives that had woven themselves together into something stronger than blood. I had gone back to school. I had a job at the very library where Julian worked. We spent our breaks sharing sandwiches and debating the merits of obscure poets. My father hadn't called, and my mother's side of the family remained a closed book. But as I looked at Julian, I realized I wasn't an orphan. I was a son of choice, a partner of soul. "You know," Julian said, leaning against the doorframe as I basted the Christmas chicken, "I thought I was saving you that night. But the truth is, this apartment was just a museum before you got here. You brought the noise. You brought the light. You saved me from a very quiet, very lonely excellence." I walked over and leaned my forehead against his. "We saved each other," I corrected him. Outside, the New York snow began to fall again, but this time it didn't feel like shards of glass. It looked like confetti. It looked like a celebration. I reached out and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the amber glow of the Christmas tree to illuminate the room. In the silence of the holiday, there were no ghosts left, only the two of us, standing in the sanctuary we had built out of a chance encounter and a heavy wool sweater. The road had been long, and the frost had been deep, but the destination? The destination was exactly where I was supposed to be. I used to think that being family was a matter of DNA and shared last names. But sitting here tonight, watching the snow fall on a city that once felt like a graveyard, I finally understand the truth. Blood might give you a beginning, but love, real, chosen love, gives you a home. Julian didn't just give me a roof, he gave me the permission to exist. And sometimes that's the greatest gift a stranger can ever offer. If this story touched your heart, or if you believe that everyone deserves a place to belong this holiday season, please hit that subscribe button and join our community here at Gay Stories Chronicles. We tell these stories because visibility is the first step toward healing, and we're glad you're part of our journey.